Hello, my friend. You are in my inner circle membership group, and you asked me a very specific question. You asked me what the difference and similarity between Buddhism and existential therapy are. And I said I would do a separate video because it is so intricate. And of course, even in my little videos, I can't go into it in great detail. But here is a snapshot idea about how those two relate to each other. Because yes, there is a lot of similarity. And as you probably know, people like Nietzsche and Heidegger were very interested in Buddhism because they saw that there are very many things that are the same, and therefore we can, build on that and support each other, as it were. So here we go. They come from many different cultures. And of course that makes them different, and yet both speak about awakening or waking up to life and looking at things from a different perspective. So that's an important similarity. They're both really interested in understanding the nature of human existence. And they know that to find clarity of life, putting new light into the world, is the way to create a more meaningful life. Neither of them appeals to a god or divinity. They are ways in which ordinary human beings can create full, better lives that are more satisfying without appealing to an authority above you and taking complete responsibility for how you do this by yourself. Both of them very centrally address the negatives of life, the shadows, especially the human suffering and the impermanence of human existence. Both those theories are very clear that without facing up to that, nothing is going to improve. So they also don't address those negatives as if they were punishments from a god, but rather as if they are about the darkness that we need to somehow overcome in this lifetime, as if our lifetime is a challenge to us to find the light and bring it into the world. So from different sides, from different perspectives, they have those same kind of objectives. Now, of course, Buddhism is very well organized with its Four Noble Truths and its Eightfold Path, whereas existential thinking is much more varied, and different authors have different views of how to live or what you might try or what you might experiment with. And it also is less doctrinaire because of that. But nevertheless, they are still following a similar theme, which is about confrontation with yourself and how you can accomplish this bringing of light into a world full of darkness and shadows. So for Buddhism, that is about dukkha, the principle of suffering that is at the center of all of humanity, which comes from our dissatisfaction and also from our craving. Whereas from an existential perspective, it is about a search for ultimate realities, the things that are true for all life, and also a confrontation with limitations in life which give rise to possibilities. So the existential work is always about learning to work with your finding of a balance between opposites and polarities, and learning to live with the tension of the paradox of that. They both reject the idea of a solid self. They both work with the idea of the importance of a soluble self, or a changeable self, or even maybe a non-existent self. So the principle of no self, or anatta in Buddhism, is quite similar to the principle in existential thought that existence precedes essence, that things exist first and then create an essence, create what will arise from that existence. So there is no predetermined self, no identity that is fixed, but rather a meaning that has to be created in life, and the challenge of that. Self is seen as a process and a project from an existential perspective, whereas in Buddhism the objective, like in Taoism, is to diminish and dissolve the self. So those are quite different ways to move forward with this idea of no self. So both, nevertheless, prize personal responsibility, the possibility for an individual to be self-reliant, and that takes us back to the idea of light on the path again. The Buddha said, be a lamp unto yourself. And as existential therapists, we speak a lot about retrieving your inner light, or rediscovering the light in the world, even when it's hidden. So it's all about light and dark, and maybe the struggle between those, but an awareness of the choices we have in dealing with that, and how with those choices comes a personal responsibility from an existential perspective for each individual to learn to master this process of being in the world in a better and better way by managing the paradoxical energies that are in the world. Buddhists, of course, have the Eightfold Path, which gives you specific steps to take to move forward. So that's quite different. And also the objective is quite different. The Buddhist seeks nirvana, which is a state of ultimate nothingness, liberation. Whereas from an existential perspective, there is a sense that liberation is a constant process of gaining more awareness and a not knowing of where that will lead. It is about becoming more authentic, which is to see more and more of the opposites of the life as it exists in the world and how it manifests through human beings. But it isn't about knowing what the goal of that is. It leaves a doubt there. It leaves an open-ended pathway which is gradually changing as we learn more through scientific findings. So existential thinking goes hand in hand with scientific exploration, whereas Buddhism, in that sense, is more religious and therefore more doctrinaire than existential ways of working or living. So Buddhists seek to end suffering and attain enlightenment. Existentialists accept suffering as part of the human condition and seek different sorts of values like solidarity, meaning, purpose, and individual values may change and may be different for different people, different cultures, or for individuals at different times. There's also a big difference between the approach to emotion. Buddhists, by wanting to end suffering, seek to lessen emotion and create a state of calm and non-emotion, more like Stoicism. But existentialist seeks to have more emotion and to manage that emotion and understand the value of that emotion and the meaning of that emotion, because emotion is seen as something that is a way marker and that sort of is an indicator of your direction of travel, and therefore gaining a kind of virtuosity with your emotions is one of the ways of going forward on an existential path. Both, though, are very aware of the importance of holding nothingness and emptiness. The sunyata experience of emptiness is the idea that nothing has an independent essence and that everything is connected. Whereas the existential idea is that there is a differentiation between things in the world that have an essence that can be analyzed and consciousness, which is much wider ranging and which brings liberation and freedom into the world. So to carry the responsibility for how you live with that freedom becomes very important. The final distinction that I wanted to mention is that between the belief about karma in Buddhism and the idea of reincarnation and rebirth and wanting to end that cycle, whereas from an existential worldview that is based in scientific evidence, we do look at consequences of choices and consequences of actions, and therefore learning to be more careful and cautious in how we exercise our freedom with each other in this world, but not in terms of seeing that in some kind of religious way, but in terms of valuing our own capacity for living a responsible, fulfilling, balanced life in which we create some value and worth in the world and for ourselves at the same time. I hope it helps. There's much I've left out and much more that could be said, but I think it shows you how they come together and how they are also different as ways of thinking, ways of being, and ways of understanding the meaning of life. Both are well worth exploring, as indeed is Taoism too, which also has much in common, but is also very different for similar reasons with existential thought and practice. Take care, my friend. I hope this clarifies things a little bit.